Hi, I'm Madison. Most people call me Maddie. I'm 29 years old and I manage the night shift at Danny's Diner on Route 47. It's not glamorous work. Dealing with drunk college kids at 2 a.m., cleaning up spilled coffee, and making sure the regulars get their usual orders. But I'm good at what I do. I've been there for 8 years, worked my way up from waitress to assistant manager to night shift supervisor. I take pride in running a tight ship, keeping my staff motivated, and making sure every customer leaves satisfied. But that Tuesday evening in March changed everything I thought I knew about my family. I'd stopped by my parents' house in Riverside Heights, the nice suburban neighborhood with the manicured lawns and 2-car garages. I still had a key from when I lived there briefly after college, before I got my own apartment above the flower shop downtown. Mom had texted asking me to pick up some old photo albums she'd found in the attic. Family memories, she'd called them, though I wondered if any of those memories would actually include me in a meaningful way. The house was quiet when I walked in. Dad's laptop was open on the kitchen counter, still logged into his bank account. I wasn't snooping, I swear I wasn't. I was just moving it aside to set down my purse when the screen lit up, and I saw it. A transaction history that made my blood run cold. Transfer to Victoria Chin, $125,000. Law school tuition fall, 2019. Transfer to Victoria Chin, $130,000. Law school tuition, spring 2020. Transfer to Victoria Chin, $135,000. Law school tuition fall 2020. Transfer to Victoria Chin, $110,000. Law school living expenses, 2021. The numbers kept going. $500,000. $500,000 given to my younger sister for law school. Money I never knew existed. Money that apparently was never meant for me. My hands were shaking as I screenshot the page on my phone. This had to be some kind of mistake, right? Maybe it was a loan that Tori was paying back. Maybe there was more to the story. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I felt that familiar ache in my chest. The same feeling I'd had my entire life whenever I watched my parents shower Victoria with opportunities I never got. Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own family? Like you're there, but not really seen? That's exactly how I felt staring at those bank statements. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced that crushing realization that you were never really part of the plan. When my parents came home an hour later, I was still sitting at their kitchen table staring at my phone. Dad walked in first, carrying his briefcase and checking his watch the way he always did. Mom followed, chatting about some charity luncheon she'd attended. They both stopped short when they saw me. "Madison," Mom said, her voice careful. "I didn't expect you to still be here. Did you find the photo albums?" I held up my phone, showing them the screenshot. I found something else. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, and then something that looked almost like annoyance. Not shame, not regret, annoyance, as if I'd stumbled onto something I had no right to know about. "Maddie," he said, using that condescending tone he'd perfected over the years. "That's private financial information." $500,000, Dad. My voice was steadier than I felt. "You gave Tori $500,000 for law school." Mom sat down across from me, not meeting my eyes. "Victoria needed help with her education." "And I didn't?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "I went to community college because we couldn't afford anything else. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my associate degree. I ate ramen noodles for dinner most nights because I was saving every penny for tuition. And this whole time, you had $500,000 to spend on education?" Dad's expression hardened. "Victoria is pursuing a career that requires significant investment. She's going to be a lawyer, Madison. She's going to make something of herself." The words hit like a physical blow. "And what am I, Dad? What have I made of myself?" "You work at a diner." He said it like it was something shameful, something beneath our family name. "You're 30 years old and you serve coffee for a living? Tori is going to graduate from Harvard Law School. She's going to work at a prestigious firm. She has potential. You're only good enough for a diner job, Madison." The words came out cold, final. We invested in Victoria because she can actually make use of it. I felt like I'd been slapped. 30 years of subtle favoritism, of being the afterthought, of watching my sister get everything while I scraped by, it all crystallized in that moment. But what came next was even worse. The front door opened and Victoria walked in. Perfect timing, as always. She was wearing one of those expensive blazers that cost more than I made in a month, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun, carrying her leather messenger bag from law school. She looked like everything our parents wanted in a daughter, polished, successful, destined for greatness. "Oh, hey, Maddie," she said, barely glancing at me as she headed for the refrigerator. "What brings you to the suburbs?" "I was just learning about your law school funding," I said, watching her face carefully. Tori paused, her hand on the refrigerator handle. She turned around slowly, and I saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt, but calculation. She was figuring out how much I knew and how to handle it. "Oh, that," she said with a little laugh. "Yeah, Mom and Dad have been incredibly generous." "Incredibly generous," I repeated. $500,000 generous. She shrugged, pulling out a bottle of sparkling water, the expensive kind that Mom always kept stocked for her visits. "Law school is expensive. You know how it is." "Actually, I don't know how it is, Tori, because when I wanted to go to college, I was told we couldn't afford it. I was told I should be practical and think about community college or trade school. I was told that higher education was a luxury our family couldn't provide." Tori's smile didn't waver, but something cold entered her eyes. "Just be practical, Maddie," she said, echoing the exact words our parents had used to crush my dreams years earlier. "Not everyone is cut out for the same level of education. You found your place at the diner, and that's perfectly fine. Some people are meant for different things." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. This wasn't just about money. This was about worth, about potential, about which daughter deserved investment and which one should just be grateful for scraps. "Besides," Tori continued, twisting open her water bottle, "you wouldn't have been able to handle the pressure of law school anyway. It takes a certain kind of person to succeed in a competitive environment like Harvard. I've always been better at handling stress and academic challenges." She said it so matter-of-factly, like it was just an obvious truth that everyone accepted, as if the reason I hadn't gone to law school was some personal failing rather than the fact that no one had ever given me the chance. Mom cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Madison, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," I said, standing up. "I think we've all been plenty private about this for long enough. How long has this been going on? Just law school or earlier too?" The silence stretched between us. Finally, Dad spoke. "Victoria has always been focused on her goals. She's always known what she wanted to do with her life. We've supported her ambitions because they align with our family's values." "And my ambitions didn't?" "What ambitions?" Tori asked, and the genuine confusion in her voice was somehow worse than if she'd been deliberately cruel. "Maddie, you've never really had a clear direction. You've just drifted. From the diner to community college to back to the diner. We invested in someone who had a plan." I thought about all those nights I'd sat at this same kitchen table as a teenager, talking about my dreams. I'd wanted to study social work, maybe become a counselor. I'd talked about helping families, working with kids who needed advocates. But every time I brought it up, I was met with the same response. "Be realistic, Madison. Think about what you can actually achieve." Now I understood. It wasn't that my dreams were unrealistic. It was that my parents had never intended to invest in making them possible. "I had plans," I said quietly. "I had dreams. But every time I shared them, I was told to think smaller, aim lower, be more practical." Meanwhile, Tori got piano lessons, private tutoring, SAT prep courses, college application consultants. She got every opportunity to succeed, and I got advice to manage my expectations. "Because Victoria showed promise," Mom said, finally looking at me. "She was valedictorian of her high school class. She scored in the 99th percentile on her LSATs. She earned those opportunities." "With help," I pointed out. "With $500,000 of help. With a family that believed in her potential instead of constantly telling her to settle for less." Tori set down her water bottle and looked at me with what I can only describe as pity. "Maddie, I understand you're upset, but you can't blame Mom and Dad for my success. I worked hard to get where I am. I earned my grades, I earned my LSAT score, I earned my acceptance to Harvard. The money just made it possible. Exactly, I said. The money made it possible. The money you got and I didn't. The investment in your potential that was never made in mine. But that's exactly my point, she said, her voice taking on that patient tone people use when they think they're explaining something obvious to someone slow. Mom and Dad invested where they saw the best return. It's not personal, it's practical. They had limited resources. Limited resources? I interrupted. Tori, they gave you $500,000. How is that limited resources? She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but recovered quickly. Limited in the sense that they couldn't fund everyone's dreams. They had to make choices. They chose to support the daughter who was most likely to succeed. The casual way she said it, as if my worth as a person could be calculated in potential earnings and prestige, left me speechless. This wasn't just about money or education. This was about being deemed less valuable, less worthy of investment, less deserving of dreams. I looked around the kitchen, at the family photos on the refrigerator that were mostly of Tori's achievements, at the Harvard Law School magnet prominently displayed, at the comfortable home that my parents could afford while telling me for years that college was too expensive. 5 years, I said finally. In 5 years, this conversation is going to look very different. What do you mean? Mom asked. But I was already walking toward the door, my purse clutched in my hand, the screenshot still glowing on my phone screen. I turned back one last time to see all 3 of them watching me. Dad with annoyance, Mom with concern, and Tori with that same pitying smile. Just wait, I said. Just wait and see what the diner girl can actually accomplish when she stops believing what her family tells her about herself. I left them standing there in their perfect kitchen in their perfect house, surrounded by the evidence of their perfect investment in their perfect daughter. But as I drove home to my small apartment above the flower shop, something had shifted inside me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking myself why I wasn't good enough for my family's investment. I was asking myself why they weren't good enough for mine. The next few weeks passed in a blur of painful realizations. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. I started remembering things I'd pushed aside, explained away, or accepted as normal family dynamics. When Tori was 16, she got a brand new Honda Civic for her birthday. Not expensive, but reliable and safe for a new driver. I remember being excited because I thought it meant I'd get a car when I turned 16 too. Instead, I got a lecture about responsibility and the importance of earning things myself. I rode the bus until I was 25 and could afford to buy my own used Toyota with money I'd saved from waitressing tips. When Tori graduated high school, she got a summer trip to Europe with her best friend, a cultural education experience before college. When I graduated, I got a part-time job at the diner to help pay for my community college classes. When Tori started college, she got a full meal plan, a single dorm room, and a monthly allowance for incidentals and social activities. When I started community college, I packed peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and walked 45 minutes each way because I couldn't afford parking passes. But the thing that hurt most was remembering how I'd internalized all of it, how I'd convinced myself that Tori deserved these things more than I did because she was smarter, more driven, more successful. I'd become complicit in my own diminishment, accepting the narrative that I was the family member with lower potential, fewer prospects, smaller dreams. The worst part was how subtle it had been. My parents never said, "We love Tori more than you." They never said, "You don't matter." Instead, it was 1,000 small messages. Be practical, Madison. Think about what you can realistically achieve. Tori has always been our academic star. You're good with people. Maybe service industry work would suit you. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one so small it seemed petty to complain about, but together they formed a clear message. You are less than. You are worth less investment, less belief, less opportunity. I started paying attention to family dynamics in a way I never had before. At Sunday dinners, which I'd been attending religiously for years, trying to maintain connection with my family, I noticed how conversations flowed. When Tori talked about law school, everyone leaned in. Mom asked follow-up questions. Dad bragged to neighbors about her internships and her grades. They saved articles about the legal profession to show her. When I talked about work, about the new employee training program I'd developed, or the way I'd mediated a conflict between two difficult coworkers, or my ideas for improving efficiency during rush hours, I got polite nods and quick changes of subject. My achievements weren't worth celebrating because they happened at a diner. My skills weren't worth acknowledging because they weren't applied in a prestigious environment. It was during one of these Sunday dinners, about 3 weeks after my discovery of the bank statements, that I noticed something else. Something that would become central to everything that happened next. Tori was wearing a bracelet I recognized, a delicate silver chain with a small locket. My grandmother's bracelet. The one Grandma Chin had promised to leave to whichever granddaughter takes care of family the most. Grandma had lived with us for the last 2 years of her life, and I'd been the one who drove her to doctor's appointments when my parents were busy with work. I'd been the one who sat with her in the evenings, listening to her stories about immigrating from Taiwan and building a life in America. I'd been the one who helped her with her medications, who made sure she ate when her appetite was poor, who held her hand when she was scared about her increasing forgetfulness. Tori had been too busy with school to help much. She'd visit on holidays and during summer breaks, bringing flowers and sitting for brief, cheerful conversations before retreating to her room to study. Everyone understood. Law school was demanding. Tori's time was precious. Her energy needed to be focused on her career. But Grandma had been clear about the bracelet. She'd shown it to me many times, telling me about how her own grandmother had given it to her, how it was meant to be passed down to someone who understood the importance of family, who knew how to take care of people. "Maddie," she'd said just a few months before she died, "this will be yours someday. You have your grandmother's heart." Yet here was Tori, wearing it casually with her law school outfit, as if it had always been meant for her. "That's a beautiful bracelet, Tori," I said during dessert, keeping my voice light. "Where did you get it?" She glanced down at her wrist and smiled. "Oh, this? It was Grandma's. Mom gave it to me after the funeral. Isn't it lovely? It goes with everything." I looked at Mom, who was suddenly very interested in her slice of apple pie. "Mom, I thought Grandma wanted me to have that bracelet. She talked about it all the time when I was taking care of her." "Oh, Madison," Mom said without looking up. "Your grandmother was getting confused toward the end. She said a lot of things. I thought Tori should have it since she's at such an important stage in her career. The bracelet will be more appropriate for the professional environments she'll be working in." More appropriate. Because a Harvard law student deserved family heirlooms more than a diner manager. Because prestige determined worthiness even when it came to Grandma's dying wishes. "Besides," Tori added, "Grandma would want it to go to someone who could honor her memory in the right way, someone who's building the kind of life she would have been proud of." The implication was clear. My life wasn't the kind that would make Grandma proud. My choices weren't worthy of honoring her memory. The bracelet belonged with the granddaughter who was going somewhere, not the one who was standing still. I excused myself from dinner early that night, claiming I had to work an early shift. But as I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about that bracelet on Tori's wrist. It wasn't just about the jewelry itself, though the bracelet was beautiful and had enormous sentimental value. It was about the pattern it represented. Even in death, even when it came to honoring the woman who had specifically chosen me as her caregiver, I was being written out of the family narrative. My role as Grandma's companion and advocate for 2 years meant nothing compared to Tori's potential for professional success. That night, I sat in my small apartment above the flower shop and did something I'd never done before. I made a list of every memory I could think of where I'd been treated as less important than Tori. It took me 3 hours to write it all down, and by the end, I had 12 pages of moments both large and small. The piano lessons Tori got while I was told we couldn't afford music education for both of us. The family vacation to Disney World when I was 10, except I got sick the day before and was left with our neighbor while the rest of the family went without me. No one suggested postponing the trip or staying home. The decision had been made. The family's joy didn't depend on my presence. The way my parents had immediately supported Tori's decision to major in political science and pursue law school. while spending years trying to talk me out of my interest in social work. The helping professions don't pay well, Madison. You have to think practically about your future. But Tori's expensive path to becoming a lawyer was treated as an obvious, worthy investment, the way family stories were told at gatherings. Tori's childhood achievements were funny anecdotes that got repeated every year. My achievements were forgotten or minimized. The time I won second place in the county science fair got less family attention than the time Tori got a B+ on a particularly difficult math test. As I wrote, I realized something that chilled me. This wasn't just favoritism or even unconscious bias. This was systematic exclusion. For 30 years, my family had been crafting a narrative in which I was the secondary character in my own life story, the supporting player who existed to make the main character look better by comparison. But here's what they'd forgotten about supporting players. We see everything. We notice all the behind-the-scenes moments that the stars miss. We know where all the bodies are buried because we're the ones who've been quietly cleaning up messes and keeping secrets. And sometimes, just sometimes, the supporting player decides it's time to step center stage. That bracelet on Tori's wrist was going to come back to me. I didn't know how yet, but I was certain of it. Along with a lot of other things that had been taken from me over the years, my family had spent 30 years teaching me that I wasn't worth their investment. It was time for me to stop investing in them. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. I wasn't actually sick, but I needed time to think, to plan, and most importantly, to investigate. If my family had been lying to me about money, about opportunities, about Grandma's wishes, what else had they been hiding? I started with the bank statements. During my years of financial struggle, I'd become pretty good at research. You learn to dig for information when you're trying to find scholarships, grants, or any opportunity that might help you get ahead. I spent the morning creating a timeline of every major expense my parents had made for Tori versus what they'd spent on me. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 15 years, starting from when Tori was in 8th grade and got private tutoring for advanced math, my parents had invested over $850,000 in her future. Private lessons, test prep, college consulting, study abroad programs, internship housing in expensive cities, law school tuition, living expenses, professional wardrobe, bar exam prep courses. The list went on and on. My total? Roughly $3,200. A used laptop for community college graduation, my share of family health insurance until I turned 26, and 1 semester of car insurance when I was 19 and rear-ended someone. But the bank statements were just the beginning. I needed to understand the full scope of what had been kept from me, and I needed evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. I needed witnesses. Mrs. Rodriguez had been our next-door neighbor since I was 14. She was retired now, spent most of her time in her garden, and had always been kind to me. More than kind, actually. She'd been one of the few adults in my life who seemed to notice when I was struggling and tried to help in small ways. During my senior year of high school, when I was working after school and couldn't afford lunch most days, she used to invite me over for extra soup that she'd accidentally made too much of. I knocked on her door that Tuesday afternoon, not sure what I was hoping to learn, but knowing she'd observed my family dynamics for years from a unique outside perspective. "Madison," she said, opening the door wide and gesturing me inside. "What a lovely surprise. I was just making tea. Would you like some?" Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, and the afternoon sunlight streaming through her windows made everything feel warm and safe. It was such a contrast to the cold perfection of my parents' house that I almost started crying right there. "Mrs. Rodriguez," I said, accepting a cup of chamomile tea, "I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Have you noticed differences in how my parents treat Tori and me?" She set down her own cup and looked at me for a long moment. "Oh, sweetheart," she said finally. "I've been waiting 15 years for someone to ask me that question." What followed was 2 hours of validation that was both healing and heartbreaking. Mrs. Rodriguez had indeed noticed everything. She'd watched my parents miss my high school graduation because Tori had a college orientation that same weekend. She'd seen me walking to work in the rain while Tori's car sat in the driveway unused because she was away at school. She'd observed the difference in how my parents talked about us to other neighbors. "Your mother brags about Victoria constantly," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. "Her grades, her internships, her law school acceptance. But when people ask about you, she just says you're finding your way or taking things one step at a time, as if you're somehow behind in life instead of working incredibly hard to build something for yourself." She told me about the time she'd complimented my parents on how responsible and hardworking I was, and my father had responded by saying, "Well, someone has to be practical in the family," as if being responsible was a consolation prize rather than a virtue. But the most important thing Mrs. Rodriguez told me was about Grandma's bracelet. "Your grandmother specifically told me that bracelet was for you," she said firmly. "It was about 6 months before she passed. We were sitting on your parents' back porch while you were inside helping her with her medication, and she pointed to the bracelet on her wrist and said, 'That girl has taken such good care of me. She deserves something beautiful that reminds her how much love can mean.' She was very clear about it, Madison. That bracelet was meant for you." I left Mrs. Rodriguez's house with her phone number programmed into my phone and a promise that she would be willing to speak up about what she'd witnessed if it ever became necessary. But I needed more than one witness. I needed documentation. That evening, I drove to my parents' house when I knew they'd be out at their Tuesday bridge club. I still had a key, and technically, I was supposed to pick up some more photo albums from the attic. But I had a different mission. My father's home office was in the converted basement, and he was meticulous about keeping files. I found what I was looking for in a filing cabinet marked Family Financial Records. There were folders for both Tori and me, though mine was significantly thinner. Tori's folder was like a roadmap of privilege. Private school application fees, SAT tutoring invoices, college application consultant bills, study abroad program payments. But what really caught my attention was a folder labeled Victoria Investment Strategy. Inside were printed emails between my father and his financial advisor, dating back to when Tori was in middle school. "We want to ensure Victoria has every possible advantage," one email from my father read. "Consider this a long-term investment in her earning potential. We're prepared to spend whatever is necessary to maximize her opportunities." Another email from 3 years later. "Victoria's LSAT scores are excellent. We're prepared to fund the full cost of law school plus living expenses. This should secure her admission to a top-tier program and allow her to focus completely on her studies without financial stress." But the email that made my hands shake was dated just 2 years ago. "Madison has expressed interest in returning to school for social work, but we don't see the return on investment. Victoria's legal career will allow her to support the family financially in the future. We'd prefer to continue concentrating our educational investments in her." They had discussed my dreams with their financial advisor and decided I wasn't worth the investment. While I was working double shifts at the diner and researching scholarship opportunities, trying to figure out how to afford the social work program at the state university, my parents had been actively deciding not to help me because my future earning potential wasn't high enough to justify the expense. I photographed every document with my phone, then kept looking. In a folder marked Estate Planning, I found copies of Grandma's will, both versions. The original will, dated 3 years before Grandma died, was clear. "To my beloved granddaughter Madison, who has shown such care and devotion to family, I leave my silver bracelet that belonged to my own grandmother, along with the sum of $50,000 to help her pursue her dreams of helping others." The second will was dated 6 months before Grandma died, during the period when her Alzheimer's was getting worse and she was becoming confused about names and faces. In this version, the bracelet and money were left to my granddaughter Victoria, who has shown such promise in her academic pursuits. But there was something else in the file that made my stomach turn. A note from my mother to the estate attorney. "Mother has been very confused lately and keeps talking about giving her bracelet to Madison, but Victoria is clearly the more appropriate recipient. Could you help us ensure the will reflects what Mother would want if she were thinking clearly?" They had manipulated a sick, elderly woman into changing her will. They had stolen my inheritance and given it to Tori, then convinced themselves it was for Grandma's own good. I was so focused on photographing documents that I almost didn't hear the garage door opening. My parents were home early. I quickly shoved everything back into the folders, grabbed a random box of photos from a shelf, and headed upstairs, trying to look casual. "Madison," my mother called as I reached the kitchen. "What are you doing here?" "Getting the photo albums you asked for," I said, holding up the box. I was just about to leave, but my father was looking at me with suspicion. "You look upset. Is everything all right?" For just a moment, I considered telling them what I'd found. Part of me wanted to confront them right there, to demand explanations and apologies. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of how they'd dismissed my feelings 3 weeks earlier, or maybe it was a newfound strategic instinct I didn't know I possessed. "Just tired from work," I said. "I should head home." As I drove back to my apartment, I realized I had a decision to make. I could confront my family privately, hope for acknowledgement and change, and probably be gaslit and dismissed again. Or I could do something bigger, something that would force the truth into the open where it couldn't be denied or explained away. The next few days, I reached out to other people who had witnessed my family's dynamics over the years. My Uncle James, my father's younger brother, had always seemed uncomfortable during family gatherings when the conversation turned to comparing Tori's and my achievements. When I called him and carefully brought up the subject, his response surprised me. "Madison, I've wanted to say something for years, but it wasn't my place," he said. "The way your parents have treated you compared to Victoria has always bothered me and your Aunt Sarah. We've talked about it many times. It's been painful to watch." He agreed to meet me for coffee, and during that conversation, I learned that other family members had noticed the favoritism too. They'd just felt powerless to intervene in another family's parenting decisions. "Your grandmother talked to Sarah about the bracelet," Uncle James told me. "She was very upset in her final weeks because she kept asking for you, and your mother kept making excuses for why you couldn't visit as often. Your grandmother thought you were avoiding her, but Sarah and I knew you were working extra shifts to pay for her medication copays that your parents claimed they couldn't afford." The pieces were falling into place. Not only had my parents invested unequally in Tori's and my futures, they'd actively prevented me from spending time with Grandma near the end of her life by failing to tell me how much she wanted to see me. They'd been managing information, controlling narratives, and manipulating situations for years. My friend Ashley Kim, whom I'd known since high school, provided another crucial perspective when I finally told her what I'd discovered. "Maddie, I watched you work yourself to exhaustion trying to pay for community college while Tori posted Instagram photos from her study abroad semester in Rome," Ashley said. "I remember thinking your parents must be going through financial difficulties or something because the difference in opportunities you two got was so extreme. I never imagined they were choosing to spend money on one daughter and not the other." Ashley had her own successful career now. She'd become a marketing executive at a tech company, and she offered something I hadn't expected: professional help. "If you decide you want to tell this story publicly, I know how to make sure people listen," she said. "I know how social media works, how to document things properly, how to build a narrative that can't be ignored or dismissed." But I wasn't ready for public exposure yet. I needed one more piece of evidence, something that would be undeniable even to my family. I needed to understand the full scope of the financial manipulation, and I suspected there was more to discover. The breakthrough came when I remembered something from my childhood. When I was 12, my parents had briefly separated. Not a full divorce, but my father had moved out for about 6 months while they went to couples therapy. During that time, my mother had been more honest with me about money than she'd ever been before or since. "We have money set aside for both you girls' futures," she'd told me one night when I'd asked why I couldn't take guitar lessons like my friend Emma. "But sometimes parents have to make decisions about timing and priorities. When the time is right, we'll make sure you have opportunities too." I'd held on to that promise for years, believing that my turn was coming, that my parents were just waiting for the right moment to invest in my dreams the way they were investing in Tori's. Now I realized that promise had been a lie, but it made me wonder, where was the money that had supposedly been set aside for me? The answer came when I convinced Ashley to help me do some more sophisticated financial investigation. Using her marketing skills and my knowledge of my parents' habits, we were able to piece together a clearer picture of their financial situation. They weren't just wealthy enough to spend $850,000 on Tori's education and opportunities. They were wealthy enough to have done the same for both of us without any financial strain at all. My father's consulting business had been thriving for years. My mother's part-time work at the art gallery was essentially a hobby that covered her personal expenses. They owned their house outright, had significant retirement savings, and had been steadily building wealth through investments. The money for my education had existed all along. They had simply chosen not to spend it on me. But there was something else Ashley discovered through her professional network research tools. My parents had started a small foundation 5 years earlier, a charitable organization that provided scholarships for promising young women pursuing careers in law and public service. They had been giving away money to help other people's daughters achieve their dreams while telling me they couldn't afford to help me achieve mine. The irony was almost too perfect. My parents, who had spent years telling me to be practical and manage my expectations, had been funding scholarships for young women who wanted to pursue exactly the kind of career I'd dreamed of. I sat in Ashley's apartment that Friday night, surrounded by printed documents and timeline charts we'd created, and felt something I'd never experienced before. It wasn't anger exactly, though there was certainly anger involved. It was clarity. For the first time in my life, I could see my family situation with complete objectivity. This wasn't about love or disappointment or different parenting styles. This was about calculated exclusion. My parents had made a conscious choice to invest in one daughter's future while sabotaging the others. They had manipulated an elderly woman with dementia to steal my inheritance. They had lied to me for decades about their financial situation while funding opportunities for strangers. "What are you going to do?" Ashley asked. I looked at Grandma's bracelet in one of the photos I'd taken of Tori wearing it at Sunday dinner. In that picture, Tori was laughing at something my father had said, her hand gesturing as she told a story about law school. The bracelet caught the light, looking beautiful and elegant on her wrist, but it didn't belong there. "I'm going to get back what's mine," I said, "and I'm going to do it in a way that makes sure the truth can't be hidden or explained away ever again." Ashley leaned forward. "What do you have in mind?" "Tori's law school graduation is in 3 weeks," I said. "Big party, lots of family and friends, everyone celebrating her achievements, and my parents' successful investment in her future." I picked up my phone and scrolled to the Facebook event page for the graduation party. 200 people invited, including extended family, family friends, my parents' business associates, Tori's law school classmates, and several professors. "That's a lot of witnesses," Ashley observed. "Exactly," I said. "It's going to be the perfect venue for a presentation about family financial planning and the importance of transparency." Ashley grinned. You're going to drop all this evidence at her graduation party?" "I'm going to give everyone there a very educational evening about the real cost of raising 2 daughters with equal love and investment," I said. "And I'm going to do it with documentation they can't dispute." But first, there was one more thing I needed to do. I needed to file a legal challenge to Grandma's will. Not because I necessarily expected to win. Proving undue influence on someone with dementia can be difficult, but because it would create an official legal record of what had happened. It would make my accusations more than just family drama. It would make them a matter of legal record. The next Monday, I took a personal day and met with a probate attorney who specialized in elder law. When I showed him the 2 versions of Grandma's will and the note from my mother to the estate attorney, his expression grew serious. "This is definitely grounds for a challenge," he said. "The timing of the will change, combined with your grandmother's diagnosis and your mother's written request for the attorney to help ensure the will reflects what Mother would want, could constitute undue influence. Even if we can't prove it definitively, the legal challenge will put everything on record." He also explained something I hadn't realized. In most states, challenging a will creates a public record. Anyone who wanted to could look up the case and see the evidence I was presenting. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. Legal challenges can be expensive and emotionally difficult. They also tend to destroy family relationships permanently. I thought about 30 years of being treated as less valuable than my sister. I thought about Grandma asking for me in her final weeks while my parents made excuses for my absence. I thought about the silver bracelet on Tori's wrist and the $50,000 that should have helped me pursue my dreams of helping families just like mine. Some relationships are worth destroying, I said. File the challenge. 3 weeks later, I stood in the parking lot of the Riverside Country Club, watching my family's friends and associates arrive for Tori's graduation celebration. The legal challenge had been filed that morning, which meant it would be public record by tomorrow. But tonight, I was going to make sure everyone who mattered to my family knew exactly what kind of people they really were. I'd spent those 3 weeks preparing meticulously. Ashley had helped me create a presentation that was professional, well-documented, and impossible to dismiss as emotional family drama. We'd prepared packets of information for key guests, copies of the bank statements, the emails about investment strategy, the 2 versions of Grandma's will, and a timeline of financial decisions that made the pattern of favoritism undeniable. I'd also prepared myself emotionally for what was about to happen. This wasn't going to be a private family conversation that could be controlled or contained. This was going to be public, permanent, and devastating. After tonight, there would be no going back to the way things were. But as I walked toward the country club entrance, wearing my best dress and carrying a folder full of truth, I realized I didn't want to go back. I was done being the daughter who accepted less, who made excuses for unequal treatment, who smiled politely while her family celebrated achievements built on her exclusion. Tonight, the whole story was coming out.